El Legado musical de Bruce Lee. There are nights when history doesn't warn you it's about to happen. This was one of those nights. A 210-kilogram man walked onto the stage with a smile on his face and a conviction in his chest that everything he was seeing was a lie, that the small man in the center of the stage was an actor, an illusionist, a fraud dressed in a white t-shirt. What that man didn't know was the name of who stood before him, and by the time he found out, it was already too late. But this isn't the story you think it is, because Bruce Lee didn't win easily that night. It didn't reach its climax in 3 seconds with a smile and applause. That night, the most dangerous man in the world nearly fell, and what happened after he almost fell is what nobody ever talks about. Stay with me. This story, you deserve it complete. Before I tell you what happened on that stage, I need to ask you something small but important. If you're not yet subscribed to this channel, do it now. It costs you nothing. Every story we tell here exists because you choose to stay. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. City, country, whatever you'd like. Every comment is a real person on the other side of the screen, and that matters to us more than you can imagine. All right, now back to the moment. San Francisco, October 1967. The Civic Auditorium smelled of varnished wood, old sweat, and traces of cigarettes from someone who had smoked in the hallway and whose smoke still hadn't found its way out. The lights above the stage were white and direct, the kind of light that forgives nothing. Outside, the city kept its rhythm. Inside, 700 people occupied every chair, every inch of aisle, every available point of support. The event was called Pacific Martial Arts Demonstrations. 3 hours of exhibitions, forms, techniques, controlled sparring. The entrance fee was a considerable amount for a Tuesday in October 1967. People had paid because word had spread that this particular night had something different, not just kata and board-breaking demonstrations, something without an exact name, but that those who had seen it the previous week in Oakland described with the same 4 words, regardless of who was speaking. You can't explain it. In the 10th row, arms crossed, and with the expression of someone who already knows they're going to be bored but gives the world one last chance, sat Victor Ramos. He was not a man who went unnoticed. He stood at 1.9 meters. He weighed 210 kilograms, not the soft weight of someone who eats too much, but the compact and hard weight of someone who had spent 12 years turning his body into an argument. Catch wrestling fighter in the Bay circuits, occasional trainer of private bodyguards, known among those who knew him as the Wall. It wasn't a term of affection, it was a literal description. Fighting Victor was fighting something that didn't yield, didn't retreat, and didn't understand the concept of enough. He had paid because 3 different people had told him this was the best. And when 3 different people, none of whom had any reason to lie to him, said the same thing about someone, Victor Ramos felt something that in another man would be called curiosity. In him, it was called skepticism with an expiration date. He had spent 40 minutes observing. The man on stage had broken boards with his fists, correct angle. Victor knew it, not real force. He had demonstrated hand speed with volunteers who couldn't follow it. They cooperated. Victor knew this because nobody in a stage demonstration truly resists. He had spoken about philosophy and movement and something called Jeet Kune Do with the eloquence of someone who knows exactly what an audience that has never been in a real fight likes to hear. The audience applauded. Victor did not applaud. Applauding meant admitting that what he saw was real, and Victor Ramos admitted nothing that he couldn't touch. Man on stage was compact, almost lean from a distance, 63 kilograms, maybe 65, wide shoulders that contrasted with a narrow waist. He wore a white t-shirt and black trousers. The first thing Victor had noticed was that his bare feet on the stage floor made no sound when he moved. Victor's own bare feet at 210 kilograms on that same stage would have resonated like a hammer. This man was silence in motion. That irritated Victor in a way he couldn't fully explain. In the 7th row, a woman whispered something to her companion and pointed discreetly toward the stage. The companion nodded with the expression of someone watching something shift, an internal category. Victor catalogued that expression as impressed for the wrong reasons, and that thought was what broke the expiration date of his skepticism. He stood up. When Victor Ramos stood up in a room full of people, there was an involuntary effect on those nearby. They stepped aside, not exactly from fear, but from the same instinct that makes you step back when a tree begins to fall. The nature of the movement of something with that kind of mass communicates its own language before any words arrive. He walked toward the center aisle, then toward the stage. His steps on the side stairs sounded like those of someone who has absolutely no doubt about where they're going. On stage, the man in the white t-shirt was in the middle of an explanation about the principle of minimum effort. He spoke with the calm of someone who either hadn't noticed anything yet or who had noticed everything and decided to continue anyway. The difference between those two possibilities was hard to measure from the outside. Victor climbed the last step. The audience began to murmur. Victor raised one hand toward the room, not aggressively, but with the gesture of someone asking for attention, as if he were the master of ceremonies and what was about to happen was part of the official program. Pardon the interruption. His voice needed no microphone. I've been here 40 minutes and I want to ask this gentleman an honest question. The room went silent, not the absence of sound, but the presence of expectation. 700 people holding their breath at the same time create a vacuum that you can feel in your ears. The man in the white t-shirt slowly turned toward him. His eyes were dark and completely still, no alarm, no forced curiosity, only presence, the kind of presence that doesn't need to prepare itself because it's already there. Victor pointed at him with his index finger, like someone pointing at a detail on a map. Everything you've done tonight you've done with people who cooperate, boards that don't resist, volunteers who don't fight back for real. He gestured broadly toward the audience. This is theater, it's spectacle, and these people are paying to watch theater and believe it's something else. A pause, one that lasted exactly as long as Victor needed it to last. I don't believe it's something else. And I believe that if you face someone real, someone who doesn't know the choreography, someone who won't cooperate, someone real, you would be humiliated. He pointed at the man before him again. This man would be humiliated. Someone in the fifth row let out a short exclamation. In the third row, someone whispered a name. That name spread through the room like water through paper, slowly at first, then all at once, row by row. Victor didn't hear it because his eyes were fixed on the man in the white t-shirt, looking for the reaction that always appeared, the flash of anger or the tightening of the jaw that precedes fear disguised as pride. 12 years of fighting had taught him to read that moment, that instant before the body decides what it's going to do. He found none of that. The man in the white t-shirt looked at him with an expression that Victor took 3 seconds to correctly identify. It was curiosity, not the uncomfortable curiosity of someone who doesn't know what to do, but the genuine curiosity of someone who has just found something they find interesting. When he spoke, his voice was calm and perfectly audible, without raising his volume even a degree. "What's your name?" Victor didn't expect that question. "Victor," he said after a second that was 1 second too long. "Victor," the man nodded as if the name confirmed something. "How long have you been training?" 12 years. "What disciplines?" "Catch, wrestling, boxing, judo." The man nodded again slowly. "Good, so you're not a beginner." A calibrated pause, that's important. And then, without any dramatic gesture, without announcement, without waiting for anyone in the room to finish processing what was happening, the man in the white t-shirt took 2 steps toward Victor and said with the same calm with which he had said everything else, "Show me what you think is missing." It wasn't a provocation. It didn't carry the heat of a provocation. It was a genuine invitation of the kind that only people who are not afraid of the outcome of what they're inviting can offer. Victor Ramos had spent 12 years being the biggest man in any room. Nobody had ever invited him to prove anything. People simply gave way. But here, in front of 700 people and this man who weighed half as much as him and looked at him as if everything were interesting rather than threatening, Victor felt something he rarely felt: uncertainty. If you've ever underestimated someone in your life, or someone underestimated you, and that mistake had consequences neither of you ever forgot, leave a comment before this ends. I want to hear your story. And stay, because what is about to happen on this stage is exactly what looks like it can't happen. Victor settled into his stance. It was solid, rooted. 12 years of people trying to move him and learning that it was easier to move the building. Feet shoulder-width apart, arms raised, hands closed in fists that had ended conversations far longer than this one. Everything in his body communicated the same thing with absolute clarity. I don't move. Across from him, the man in the white t-shirt took no visible stance. He remained standing as if he were waiting in a bank queue. Hands at his sides, weight distributed without emphasis, nothing announced, nothing promised. Victor found that irritating in a way that was difficult to articulate but easy to feel. The stillness of that man in front of his mass seemed like a passive insult, as if he didn't even deserve the respect of a raised guard. He threw the first punch. It was not a cautious punch or an exploratory one. It was a straight right with 210 kilograms of mass and 12 years of instinct behind it, meant to end the conversation in the first exchange. The kind of punch that had left men sitting on the floor wondering what time it was. What happened next took less time than the instant the eye needs to register movement. The man in the white t-shirt didn't block the punch, didn't dodge it backward. He shifted laterally, not much, centimeters, and Victor's fist passed through the space where a face had been and found only air. Only air. Victor felt the imbalance before he understood what was causing it. His body had committed all its mass in one direction, and that direction no longer existed. The floor beneath his feet became uncertain in a way he hadn't felt in 12 years. He didn't fall. That was the important detail. He didn't fall. He recovered his balance with the strength that only someone who has fallen enough times has, learning exactly how much muscle is needed in the last moment. He turned. He looked for the man in the white t-shirt. He was exactly where he had been, still, as if nothing had happened in the last 3 seconds. Maury, he said, just that word. Victor threw the second punch, then the third, a combination he had executed hundreds of times and that always worked for the same reason. It closed space. Right hand for the face, left hook for the side, body push to eliminate distance. 12 years had taught him that fast men slow down when space disappears. When there's nowhere to move, speed loses its advantage. The man in the white t-shirt didn't let the space disappear, not because he retreated. He didn't take a single step backward. He moved inside the combination, between the punches, not away from them, with a geometry Victor had not seen in 12 years of real fights. As if he had a complete map of the attack in his head before the punches were thrown, and had simply chosen where not to be in each fraction of a second. Victor missed the right, missed the hook, and in the moment of the body push felt something on his right wrist. Not pain yet. First it was a pressure, 2 fingers, maybe 3, at the exact point where bone and tendon share space. And then his arm did something Victor had not ordered. It bent toward an angle not in the repertoire of movements his body had learned as its own. He lost balance a second time. This time he did fall. Not completely, one knee on the floor, the other foot planted, hands searching for support, but the partial fall in front of 700 people was enough for the civic auditorium to release a sound that was not exactly applause. It was something more primitive. The collective exhale that occurs when something real happens where it wasn't expected, the kind of sound that isn't planned but escapes, the type that can't be rehearsed. Victor looked up from the knee on the floor. The man in the white t-shirt was less than a meter away, his hands at his sides, no triumph in his posture, no mockery, only that same stillness he had carried onto the stage from the beginning. "Get up," he said. "We're not finished yet." Victor stood, and that was when he made the only real mistake of that night. He let anger replace thought. 12 years of never falling had created in Victor Ramos a certainty that worked well in every situation except this one, that when something hurt him, he should go toward it with more force, not more intelligence, that the solution to resistance was always more mass, more speed, more volume, that the only argument that mattered in the end was the one measured in kilograms. He threw himself forward not with technique, with the totality of his body, 210 kilograms of muscle and anger and years of nobody having moved him, in a charge that had ended men, fights, and conversations that had started in ways he didn't like. What he hadn't calculated was the flaw, or more precisely, that someone could use the flaw as part of the response in ways he hadn't considered. The man in the white t-shirt lowered his center of gravity in an instant that seemed to contradict his build. He didn't dodge sideways, he didn't run, but became momentarily something as planted as the stage itself. And Victor's charge found resistance where it expected space, and then that point of resistance shifted with precision, and Victor felt the direction of the world change around an axis that wasn't his own. He landed on his back. The sound was audible throughout the room. It wasn't elegant, It wasn't controlled. It was the sound of 210 kilograms against stage wood, the kind of impact that makes the teeth of those who hear it clench by instinct and makes eyes open wider than normal. Victor lay on his back looking at the white lights of the ceiling. His chest took time to function normally. His lungs were working, but had lost their rhythm. The ceiling had a slight movement, which wasn't the ceiling, but his own spatial orientation system restarting. The entire room was silent. The kind of silence that only occurs when 700 people are processing something they have no category to classify. No applause yet, no exclamations, just the quiet weight of what had just happened, holding itself in the air like the cigarette smoke that still hadn't found its way out. From the floor, Victor heard slow, deliberate steps that stopped exactly beside him. He looked up. The man in the white t-shirt was standing next to him, looking down, not with disdain, but with the same expression he had carried from the beginning, genuine attention, as if Victor Ramos on the floor were as interesting as Victor Ramos standing, perhaps more. He extended his hand. Victor looked at it for a full second. He took it. The man helped him to his feet with an ease that didn't match the weight difference between them, which was itself a demonstration, though neither of them pointed it out. Standing the two men face to face, the room still in silence, Victor searched for words. He had climbed onto the stage with words, the articulated accusation, the public challenge, the loud demystification of the theater he had come to denounce. The words weren't there. It wasn't that he didn't know what to say. It was that what had happened in the last 3 minutes had modified something inside the mechanism from which words are generated, and that mechanism needed time to adjust. The man in the white t-shirt spoke first. "You're strong, not as consolation, as an objective fact," the same tone he would use to describe the weight of something, "stronger than most men I've worked with, and you have 12 years of real instinct. That's not a small thing." A pause, but instinct only works against what you already know. Victor didn't respond. "What you felt when you tried to hit me," he continued. "That moment when the space disappeared and your body didn't know what to do. That's not magic, it's geometry. It's the difference between moving toward where the punch is and moving toward where the punch is no longer going to be." He wasn't explaining for the room to hear. He was speaking directly to Victor with the concentrated attention of someone who has found something he's genuinely interested in resolving. "The martial art is not theater," he said. "It's the study of that moment. The moment when the largest body in the world doesn't know where the smallest one is." His eyes didn't seek approval, didn't blink too much. It was the kind of gaze that only people who are completely present in what they're doing have. Victor listened to all of this without interrupting, which was itself something new, not because he had no response, but because the responses he formed internally arrived and dissolved before reaching his mouth. Each one found the same obstruction, the physical memory of what had happened at his wrists, at his knees, at his back against the floor. A memory more convincing than any argument. "What is your name?" Victor finally asked. Not because he didn't already know. The murmur had traveled the entire room during the last few minutes and had reached him in fragments. He asked it because he needed to hear it directly in that specific voice. The man in the white t-shirt smiled for the first time all night. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who recognizes the moment when another person arrives somewhere important. "Bruce Lee," he said it the way someone says their name in an ordinary introduction, without emphasis, without waiting for the reaction it always produced. The room, however, did not have that restraint. The applause began in the first row and took approximately 4 seconds to reach the back. It wasn't the polite applause of a cultural event. It was the kind that occurs when people have seen something real and have no other way to process the real except with the palms of their hands striking each other until the sound fills the space and pushes out the silence that preceded it. Victor Ramos did not applaud, not because he didn't want to. His hands were still processing the physical memory of what had happened in them and through them, and his mind found that memory more urgent than any conventional reaction. He was looking at Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee looked back at him. "If you want to understand how it works," said Bruce, and the word "how" carried the entire weight of the universe in that specific context, "you can come to the dojo next week." It wasn't condescension. It was a genuine offer, extended toward a man who had just demonstrated that he had enough honesty in his body to fall, get up, and keep listening. There are people who remember exactly where they were that night. Not all of them. 700 people carry 700 versions of what they saw on that stage. Some remember the sound of the fall, some remember the silence that followed. Some remember Bruce Lee's slow steps approaching the man on the floor. Some remember only the extended hand. But everyone agrees on one thing about the ending, that the biggest man in the room was the one who extended the hand to lift him, and the smallest was the one who took it, not in the physical sense, in the only sense that matters. Victor Ramos went to the dojo the following week, the week after that, and the one after. What he learned in those weeks was not what he had gone to the Civic Auditorium to find. He had gone to find confirmation that martial art was decoration, theater, illusions sold to people who had never been in a real fight. What he found was something different, that the theater was what he had been performing for 12 years. The theater of force as the only argument, the theater of mass as the universal answer to every question. The theater of entering a room being the wall and leaving without anything having moved you, which is not the same as not needing to move. He hadn't realized he had spent 12 years building a fortress that was also a trap, a fortress solid enough that nothing could enter, and exactly for that reason, solid enough that nothing could leave. Late one afternoon after training, when the dojo was almost empty and the San Francisco afternoon light came in horizontal through the windows, Victor sat on the floor with his back against the wall and asked Bruce something he had been formulating for weeks. "Why did you help me up?" Bruce Lee was gathering the mats at the far end of the dojo. He kept gathering them. He took a moment to respond, not because the question surprised him, but because he was choosing the exact words. "Because knocking you down was easy," he finally said. "Leaving you there taught me nothing and taught you nothing." Victor considered that, and if I hadn't taken the hand, Bruce Lee arranged the last mat, turned toward him, then the story would have ended on the floor. A brief pause. The best stories don't end on the floor. Many years later, when someone asked Victor Ramos which was the best fight he had ever seen in his life, he didn't mention the underground championships of the Bay, didn't mention the bodyguard contracts or the names of the men who had tried to move him and learned that they couldn't. He mentioned a night in October at the San Francisco Civic Auditorium, not because Bruce Lee had knocked him to the floor, but because after knocking him to the floor, he had extended his hand. There are men who win, Victor would say with the specific weight of someone not repeating a learned phrase, but describing something he lived. And there are men who teach while they win. Those are not the same thing. And the difference between the two, he pointed to his chest with his finger, you feel it here, even if you don't have words for it for a long time. That was what Bruce Lee understood about martial art that most people still haven't understood, that the most powerful demonstration is not the one that destroys the opponent. It's the one that gives the opponent the possibility to understand something they couldn't understand before it happened. The 210-kilogram man who stepped onto the stage to prove that everything was a lie stepped off, having found the only truth that mattered, that there is a difference between knowing how to fight and knowing what you're fighting for, and that difference, that fraction of a millimeter between the fist and the face, between strength and control, between knocking down and helping up, is where everything Bruce Lee tried to tell us lives. Not in the broken boards, not in the seconds counted, in the extended hand afterward. If this story changed something in how you think about strength, about respect, about what it truly means to win, leave a like on this video. Not because we need it to exist, but because it's your way of telling this story that it mattered. And in the comments, tell me one thing. What impressed you most about what happened on that stage, Bruce Lee's technique, or what he chose to do with it once he had already won? Only those who watched the complete video know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not yet subscribed, now is the moment. We have more stories like this one, stories you won't find anywhere else. And if you want to go deeper into the philosophy that made Bruce Lee something more than a martial artist, we have the ebook The 5 Secret Rules of Bruce Lee available for free to channel subscribers. The link is in the description. You just have to register with your name and email, and we'll send it to you directly. Bruce Lee once said that water has no shape of its own. It adapts to its container, but never stops being water. That night in San Francisco, standing before 210 kilograms of absolute certainty, he was water. And The Rock learned that the strength of water is not in the striking, it's in the continuing to flow.